As we were thinking about that sort of component and OOI as a facility in general, science certainly is first and foremost, but I do want to highlight kind of what in NSF speak, we talk about the broader impacts, but I think OOI has really delivered on the partnership and the education components as well. So when we look to what OOI has done to date, there are some really unique partnerships that have emerged with the long-term ecological research site in the case of Pioneer, with some tribal connections in the case of our endurance array in terms of early career scientists, as well as some things we didn't hear about in the facility board, but I think we're going to hear more and more about some partnerships with ocean energy. On the education side, if you were able to listen in on Janice McDonald's talk, I think you get a really nice understanding of the partnerships that OOI has been doing with research at the undergraduate level, but also really opening up the ability for non-coastal institutions to do coastal research. And that may or may not include bringing in community colleges, bringing in non-R1s, et cetera. So as we were thinking about where we're going to move or potentially move the Pioneer Array to support the best science, we also started thinking about, well, those partnerships, those education opportunities were something that kind of emerged, and we really wanted to start thinking about how do we innovate to bring together new teams for the next decade for Pioneer. And we really wanted to come up with a pathway to increase the community role in the MOVE piece. And one other thing that's kind of different with this upcoming consideration is when we were originally citing the Pioneer Array, we were also very much picking the marine implementing organization that was going to be responsible for the facility components of the Pioneer. That is not the case this time. So Woods Hole will continue to run the Pioneer Array on the facility side, regardless of where the Pioneer Array winds up. So as we were pondering all of this in concert with the facility board and concert with the facility, we started thinking about some ways that we might consider how to optimally place the Pioneer that might be different from the original request for proposals approach that was used with OOI 1.0. So if I can have the next slide, Darlene. And that got us thinking about something that NSF has used in some team building type approaches in the past, and what we often refer to as ideas labs, which actually originate the ideas labs is kind of a US take on what was originally a UK idea called sand pits or sandbox approaches. And it's a way to bring together in the span of a week, usually in person, but obviously in 2020, 2021, a virtual process. We bring together groups of people who may or may not know one another already, provide them an opportunity to really explore, come together, build on that interdisciplinary piece of science, and to innovate. So in our kind of normal, or I should say in the team literature, you think about form, storm, norm, perform type approaches. Well, an ideas lab is designed to bring people together to undertake those different stages of team development in a very intensive sort of week-long process. And normally what NSF is doing when it invests in ideas labs is emphasizing that interdisciplinary aspect, looking for new teams to form. By the end of the week, sort of running a competition, and a few teams are invited to submit a proposal. That is not the case, as I said with the last slide. We're not looking to have somebody run a new pioneer location, but what we are looking to sort of have a competition for is where should the Pioneer Lab be located from 2023 for the next onwards for the next 5 to 7 years or so, that would deliver the best science in terms of intellectual merit, absolutely, but also those broader impacts, partnership, education, et cetera, components that we mentioned, what we discussed earlier. So we are looking to, we call it an innovation lab when we're not talking about proposals. So we are looking to the community to innovate the movable coastal array component of the OOI lab for the next decade. So forward looking. We actually expect to have 2 separate labs. The first lab will be kind of the opportunity to refine where the geographic foci for the next portion of Pioneer should be. And I do want to say that having Pioneer remain where it is a possible outcome. So it's not a definite move. We should refer to it as the potential move. It could be that the best science in terms of intellectual merit and broader impacts that can be delivered will be delivered by Pioneer remaining where it is. But it could in fact move with some limits that Al is going to chat with you about. So let me get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of what's going to happen as we undertake this next stage. If I can have the next slide, Darlene. So we will be working with KI, which was on the last slide. No Innovation Incorporated is a company that we usually or often at NSF use to run our ideas or innovations labs, and in partnership with the OOI Facility Board Executive Office, University of Rhode Island, we will have a call for applications to participate in an innovation lab for the Pioneer move, and then for optimizing the Pioneer move once we decide what that location will be. So while I would have loved to give you guys a link for please go send your application in now to be a participant in either or both of the innovations labs. We're about a week behind with getting that application process open. There will be a what we refer to as a micro lab. It'll be about an hour and a half where we will be sharing a lot more information, doing some exercises to give you guys a flavor for what that interaction lab is going to look like in the future. And we expect that that'll happen in 2021. Applications, we are looking to have on the order of 25 to 30 participants for Lab 1 and likely for Lab 2 as well. So we expect that applications will be due at the end of January. And we do know that the Lab 1 for the location selection will take place the week of March 15th. And if you want to participate, we are asking for full commitment to participating that week of March 15th. It will not be a full day commitment, but we want everyone present. And again, we're really looking to the lab to bring together teams that will work on why we should place the Pioneer array in location X, Y, or Z, with some limitations that I said Al will mention in just a second. But obviously the teams that are built could move on, and even if we elect not to move the Pioneer array to the location that you're favoring, gosh, what a great time to build interactions and other groups that may be taken forward in other ways. And then the follow-on innovation lab will be, once we understand where the Pioneer lab will be, we will look to optimize, again with limitations, the array once it's put out in 2023. If I can have the next and last slide for my piece. The application process is the next step for you guys to participate in. Again, we hope to have it open next week. We certainly will let everyone know when that will happen. We obviously want to hear about the science drivers, and do you have a particular location where you think it would be really good to move the Pioneer lab to? But we also are going to ask for some insights that you may have about potential partnerships that could be brought to bear in a possible new location or the same location for Pioneer. We heard a lot about early career folks, and we certainly will be paying attention to make sure we have career stages all represented within the lab. Again, we're sort of looking for where the Pioneer array is going to be for 2023 out to 2030. So then the next decade, we obviously want to engage and listen to the priorities from early career folks. We are going to ask you to let us know about your interdisciplinary interaction style. These are intense weeks as you're going through your team building and thinking across disciplinary and partnership boundaries. So we're going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your interactive style. We don't quite have all the details worked out in terms of, do you have to apply to be at both labs so that you would actually be submitting to? It's possible if you indicate your interest in this first application that you would like to be considered for both labs, that we will do that. And then we might open up to a second round, but people that obviously are just interested in the optimization piece, not the location piece. We're not quite sure what the outward facing products from the lab might be, that we will be putting a lot of interest or intellectual interest and effort into building these teams in the different locations. So we're working on what the products of the lab will be, and we're still working out. There will be an independent panel that will be helping to select the participants, and then also the location when we get to that stage at the end of Lab 1. And those panelists may or may not be repeat panelists for Lab 2. So still a few things that we're working on, and we welcome some discussion after this, but we will not be using the RFP process. We will be using an innovation lab process to determine, again, the potential location move for Pioneer for the years 2023 outwards. And I will turn it over to Al now to add a little bit on the limitations.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I'll provide some initial thoughts in 3 areas: infrastructure, environment, and financial considerations that are going to be relevant to a potential relocation. At a high level, I think the guidance can be summarized in kind of a statement. The Pioneer Array was conceived within the OOI as a relocatable coastal array suitable for moderate wave and current regimes on the continental shelf and upper slope. So that's kind of a philosophy statement that I think is wise to keep in mind. The details I'm going to present provide a sense of what that means, and there's a lot of numbers there, but I don't want us to get totally hung up on the numbers. The concept, I think, is what's important. So for the first set is the infrastructure. There's some complexity in the exact number of array elements because they change, actually the mix of elements changes winter and summer. And I think in the interest of time, rather than going through all these bullet points and listing all those numbers, think about it this way. There are basically 3 surface moorings, 6 profiler moorings, 6 gliders, and 2 AUVs. That's kind of the toolkit, the erector set that can be used in this shelf slope array. The important consideration that I do want to spend a minute on is the sampling capabilities of the different mooring types. So the surface mooring, which you see on the far right, samples the air sea interface with an instrumented buoy, the mixed layer with an instrument frame at about 7 meters depth, and near bottom with instruments about 1 meter off the bottom. There aren't any instruments between that near surface frame and the bottom. So surface and bottom, but not very good in the water column. The profiler mooring, which is the next one over to the left, samples that mid-water column from about 25 meters below the surface to about 25 meters above the bottom. And so you can see that these 2 mooring types are nicely complementary. And indeed, they're deployed as pairs of surface, subsurface, or surface mooring, profiler mooring pairs at multiple sites in the current Pioneer Array infrastructure. So that's something to think about. As we go into the expectation for a potential relocation, I think there are probably 2 sort of high-level guiding principles. One would be to maximize the use of the existing infrastructure. We're not envisioning a blank sheet of paper to redesign everything from the ground up. It should be reminiscent, certainly, of the equipment we have, and I think it can be reused fairly readily. At the same time, there's some flexibility. It doesn't have to be an exact copy of what we have now. The idea would be to advance the design in some way, to tune things in such a way that they would serve the science goals of the new site, or even tune and advance the design to better serve the science goals at the existing site, right? There's sort of an expectation to use our existing toolkit, you might say, but with some innovation and advancement of the overall concept. Go ahead to the next slide. In terms of environment, what does a continental shelf upper slope array and moderate conditions, what does that mean? Well, here's some ideas to give you a sense of the scope in terms of numbers. The design is for about 100 meters to 600 meters depth. It's currently deployed in depths between 90 meters and 450 meters. So there's some wiggle room in those numbers. Maybe 10% or something is absolutely doable. But if you want to change that by a factor of 10, it's not going to work. 10 meters, 6,000 meters, it's just not going to be a reasonable application of this infrastructure. So those are some the kind of depth constraint is one aspect. In terms of current, really designed for kind of sustained currents of order 1 knot, half a meter a second. Intermittent currents, a little stronger than that, are not a problem. We routinely see short-term currents of 0.6 to 0.8 meters per second, say up to 1.5 knots. But if you're starting to look at currents of 2 knots or so, you're going to have a problem because you're going to exceed the mooring design limits, and they will not necessarily operate or even survive at those. So there is kind of an upper bound on the currents that can be the environment in which we can deploy this in terms of current speeds. And similarly for wave heights, we typically see at the Pioneer Array now 2 to 4 meter waves, which are not problematic at all to observe and operate in. We can operate pretty well in intermittent events up to 6 to 8 meters of, say, peak wave height. But again, if you get to a regime where the waves are over 10 meters or so, you're going to exceed the design constraints of the equipment. And the next one, please. So finally, financial considerations. I think the overall mantra here to think about is there's no new money. So the redesign, the relocation, potentially the operation at a potential new site, it's all got to come from the existing budget. And out of that budget, I think need to be carved really two types of costs. One is the transition cost. If there's going to be a new site, that would involve array design, engineering design, a lot of different aspects, procurement of certain things, fabrication, integration, testing, potentially outreach and permitting in the local area. So how could this be done? The idea is that rather than continuous deployments at 6-month intervals, as we're doing now for the Pioneer Array, there would be, say, the last 6 months at the original site and the first 6 months at a new site would be unoccupied. And that savings from those incomplete or partial field operations would be applied then to this engineering, planning, testing, fabrication, et cetera. So the transition costs would be funded by sort of a phased transition between two different locations. Then once, even after a successful transition, it's worth thinking about the operating costs. As you would expect, the Pioneer operating budget includes costs for preparation, refurbishment, personnel, cruise logistics, shipping, but you might not expect that it also includes ship time. The day, day by day cost of the ship operations are within the budget. So that's different than a typical PI proposal for NSF. And so the allocate, there's not expected to be a change in the amount of, the fractional allocation to the Pioneer Array within OOI. So that means the operation at a new site would be constrained by the existing operating budget, right? So a site that might have high operating costs, say it's in a remote location that has high shipping costs and is serviced for whatever reason by a ship with a very expensive day rate, you would spend more on logistics, and therefore you'd have to spend less on instrumentation, equipment, moorings, and presumably have a reduced scope array compared to what we have now. So I guess I'll stop there. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. You can keep digging at this and think of different things to ask, I'm sure. But some of these we can answer probably now, and some of them we'll have to just take under consideration and be prepared to think about them at these data labs or innovation labs as they come up next year. So I think it's open for questions. Darlene, I don't know if you want people to raise their hands or if they have that capability.
If people would indicate their interest, I'll unmute you. So I have a list of the participants.
And let me actually add one explicit limitation that Al kind of hinted at, but as NSF, I will go ahead and say, when we removed the Southern Hemisphere arrays, we really did kind of have an emphasis on the U.S. Exclusive economic zone as we became a Northern Hemisphere array. So we would not consider locations that are outside of the U.S. for this potential relocation.
We do have questions. Stephen is first.
Yes, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Al, for that presentation. It's a real compelling argument to potentially move the array. My question is this: if in fact another location was successful in terms of making the case, would Woods Hole relocate their personnel, or would they subcontract with local personnel that would be qualified to do this work?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think we would have to consider all the aspects of the logistics and field operations, but in general, the overarching concept would be to continue to utilize the current coastal global scale node CGSN personnel within OOI to operate the array.
Okay, thanks.
Bradley Moran, next.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Lisa and Al, thank you so much. Great presentation. I just wondered if you were able to say there was any potential preference of where this array might go from NSF's side, at least in terms of logistics and costs. Thanks.
So Brad, there really isn't, with the exception of what I said with the, we would like it within the US EEZ, and obviously the limitations that Al has laid out. We do not have an ICE capable component, but on the other hand, maybe we can have some discussion about seasonal ICE. But we don't want it outside of the US. There are limitations in terms of where reusing what's out there, and knowing your Alaska interests, I think we would have a hard time on the North Slope, but we can have some discussions, but there are going to be some limitations.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Kip Shearman is next.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Al. Thanks for the presentation. My primary question was the ICE one, but I have a backup question. So in terms of estimating the operating costs for the new region, who's going to do that? Is that up to the people who are proposing new regions, or will that be somebody else?
I can take a first shot, and Lisa can correct me or change what I say. Kip, hi, Kip. My sense would be that it's a little bit of both. So the proposers should have some concepts of cost, right? And so that they can provide a compelling case that this location, if they're choosing a new location, would be that the science is achievable for the money that's available, right? So I think the proposers have some broad-based requirement to have a realizable cost structure. And then the way I see it, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sort of phase 2 workshop event is where the real details would be hashed out. And that would be in concert with the OOI operators, who would have a better handle on the cost details.
Yep, I agree with what you said, Al. Kip will go into a little bit of this in the micro lab, so that will be a chance to get a bit more in the weeds for everyone. Everyone will be invited to participate in that. But think of lab 1 as the blue skies, but there are going to be some constraints, and lab 2 really will be when we hash out more of the details and optimize within the constraints of where. And I guess as I was saying things about North Slope, I suppose one could try and argue that having an array out for 6 months of the year or 3 months of the year could be considered, but we are not going to have ice strengthened capacities.
Lisa and Al, Heidi Sosuk has a question from the chat. What is the deadline for applications to be part of Lab 1?
So we expect that the deadline will be at the end of January, Heidi, and the one, we don't have specific dates yet. We are optimistic that we will have the application process open next week, that the micro labs process, where we'll go a bit more into things, will take place in the beginning of January before the applications are due. But Lab 1 will take place the week of March 15th.
Allison McDonald is next, and Stephen, I'll get to you after Allison.
Hi, Al. Lisa. Thank you. So my question's along the same lines as the ice question, I guess, but I'm thinking more about hurricanes. And clearly, the Pioneer Array has already survived hurricanes that have reached extratropical hurricanes. But given the limitations, is it going to be possible to move it further south, where hurricanes are more likely, Gulf of Mexico even, where it'd be super interesting, but could it survive that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Allison. It probably doesn't have a simple yes/no answer. We're relatively robust to high winds, at least in terms of survivability. You might lose some instrumentation or break some things. I think the wave state would likely be the worst problem. And so one would have to really sort of think about what the net result of the hurricane is in a given location. The response in terms of wind, waves, and currents can be different. So I think that would require a fair amount of thought to give. I don't think I can give a simple answer to that. But we can survive, as you noted. This array can survive a hurricane, but it's not really designed for hurricane research. So those are kind of two different ends of the spectrum.
Thank you.
And Stephen, do you have another question?
No, I just had my hand up from before.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up. If I'm missing somebody, please put it into the chat. But I think that might be the end of this. Al and Lisa, we all very much appreciate your time. Hold on, there's one more. Oops. There we go.
This is Gordon here. So for the application for the lab 1, can we submit as a group? And then if we do submit as a group of people, then with the selection process, only pick one person to participate, or the group together?
Hi, Gordon. We do not want team applications. They will be applications from individuals. But having said that, we will ask you to indicate if you have a location preference. So we expect that there may well be multiple people in the Remain group, for example, or a Gulf of Mexico group. That may chat with one another and say, you know, I'm going to apply. Are you going to apply? So we do not want team applications, but you will be indicating if you have a geographic preference. If you're interested just in optimizing the array and don't really care about location, then we would probably think that you would be a better match for lab number 2 rather than lab number 1. So we don't want preformed teams. We want people to be essentially willing to interact and think across the disciplines. But we do recognize that there are groups that already exist, and the selection panel will be thinking about how to balance the right number of folks for potential teams for lab 1.
Jake Fritzer is up next, and I see other hands, and Doug Luther and Paula, if you want to raise your hand, you can ask your question directly if you choose to. But Jake is right up next.
Thanks, Darlene. I was wondering, going into the process, if there is any sort of predetermined weighting of the research value versus other applications such as regulation or policy or marine operations for alternative proposals, or is that weighting going to be determined during the process?
Thanks, Jake. We really, we don't have a formula as usual for NSF. If you think about our intellectual merit and broader impacts. Having said that, I guess we did have a formula for coastlines and people, but we obviously want a major return on investment from the scientific front and intellectual merit, but we absolutely are going to be considering the partnerships, the education components, and things along those lines. So no formula, but we won't fund something that would be bad science. And we also won't fund something that is great science, but really does not take into account sort of partnerships and education components as well.
Okay, next, Paula Fratantoni. Will there be an opportunity for federal partners to engage in the conversation? That is NOAA.
Sure, Paula, we'd welcome federal partners to be part of the lab. So yes, willing to consider, and certainly federal partners fall under the partnership component. So it could be, lab 1 if there's a specific location, lab 2 if you're just thinking about the array in general and the return on investment.
And from Doug Luther, who says, thanks. Given the parameters you've outlined, would you expect moving the array to Hawaii would be inappropriate?
No, I can take that. You can follow up, Lisa. I would say no, it's not inappropriate. It's plausible. You'd want to look at what could be gained scientifically from the infrastructure, which obviously has some limitations given how fast the bathymetry changes off the coast, right? But absolutely not out of the question. It's just an issue of tuning it to an achievable science goal.
Next is John Wilkin.
Yeah, I have a question about sort of the toolkit that Al described. In the original Pioneer design, it included surface piercing profilers. And I guess for various engineering reasons, those weren't successful. But the OOI endurance array is now having quite a bit of success with surface piercing profilers. So I'm wondering if there's a consideration to revive a redesigned SPP profiler and adding that to the toolkit.
Hey, John, that's a great thought. I would say we've learned a lot more about the capabilities and the limitations of the surface piercing profilers in the intervening years. And yes, I think we could reconsider them, but they would have limits that would probably be even more, I've put some numbers out there to give you a sense of what the environment we're talking about. The surface piercing profiler limits would be even more restrictive. I think that would be the difference.
Thanks.
Great. Didn't mean to interrupt. Robert Weisberg is next.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Al, for your presentation. So my question is, and maybe you've already answered it, will compatibilities with other programmatic goals and other programmatic activities be viewed as something positive or perhaps competitive?
I think positive. What do you think, Lisa? I think the answer would be that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And again, partnerships and synergies are definitely things that will be considered as the panel is helping the NSF make decisions about the relocation. And I should let me just clarify that the facility itself obviously will be part of the process, and I think Al likes to refer to himself as an information broker, but they will not be the ones that are providing NSF feedback on the where. So we will in fact have a separate panel that will be considering all of these different pieces. So yep, absolutely a positive.
John Wilkin, do you have another question?
Well, I did have a couple of things in the Q&A, and so it was just a clarification, really. Will the lab 2 be considering like a short list of finalists, or will some group be deciding after lab 1, what the final site is?
Thanks, John. We will know before lab 2 where the site is going to be. So the intention for lab 2 is that it will be optimizing after the location is known. So the intention is that at the end of lab 1, there will be presentations and potentially other products that the seated panel will be considering, and that there will be a decision made after lab 1. So lab 2 will be focused on the future location of Pioneer, which again, to reiterate, may be still in the current location, but it may be from Hawaii elsewhere, as we've heard in some of the earlier questions.
So who'll be making the judgment regarding financial and environmental feasibility of the sites that are proposed at Lab 1?
So that is the role of the OOI facility as the information broker. We hope that the community will push and sort of challenge, hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And that will all come out in the Lab 1 itself. But we will have the OOI facility as information brokers be helping to provide that information to the panel, which will be making the recommendation to NSF.
Jake, Kritzer, do you feel as though your question in the Q&A has been answered, or would you like me to go over it?
No, that was the one I asked earlier, Darlene. I just wasn't sure if the Q&A was the right place to pose it.
Got it, which is why I'm checking. And I don't see any other hands. Let's see, I'll do it one more time.
So Darlene, let me ask if we've captured everybody's email, we can probably commit to sending everybody the link to the application site if we have all that information.
We have all that information.
Awesome.
So happy to do that.
Great.
And Gordon, your hand is still up. Have you been satisfied with your
No, I have another
Okay.
question about the slides Lisa and Al showed. I think I was trying to write down some of the information. I didn't catch everything. I'd like to know, will the slides be available to us?
As long as Al and Lisa are good with that, I'm happy to send them along with the questions. We've recorded the entire presentation, so I think it would be appropriate to share that. Lisa
No
and Al, are you
concerns.
with that?
Yep, happy to share both the recording and the slides. It's fine with me.
Right, thank you.
That's fine.
So I think it's a wrap. Thank you all for your participation, and Lisa and Al, it was great, most appreciated. And really, it's an exciting process moving forward. So thanks.
Stay tuned for the micro lab where you'll have another chance to hear more about the process as well as a bit more about the limitations. And please reach out via email, etc. if you have other thoughts. Thanks.
Take care, everyone.